Hello, Andrew Weaver here, and welcome to Premonitions Podcast with an AI on the future and a brief introduction to today's guest, which is Richard Tromans. Richard has been advising and consulting for law firms and within the legal industry for some time, but also, and particularly relevant to this conversation, has hosted a blog called Artificial Lawyer, which is and covers the impact of artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc., within the legal profession. And it's around that we're particularly focused on today. Richard has some fantastic views and strong views on where and how AI will impact the profession. And without further ado, here is my discussion with Richard. I hope you enjoy. So Richard, just tell me. I've given the listeners some background to the blog, and obviously it is a flourishing product that you've created there. But I rather like the unintended consequence of the Brexit vote actually helping to spark your growth. Just give us some background on that.
So it was the early summer of last year, and my main day job, I'm a strategy advisor to law firms, and very much about forward business planning. And directly following the Brexit vote, a lot of the law firms I was working with simply said, yikes, we've got to get our heads around this first. And so I basically had a few days to really just sit and think for once, rather than just constantly chasing my tail and zooming around doing work. And something that I'd wanted to do for a long time, which I hadn't been able to do, which was to start a blog. And I'd always been very interested in AI. I'd always been interested in technology. And I finally thought, I've got probably a week or so before things calm down. Let's do a couple of blog posts. And around the same time, I went in to see Raven, as they were then, before they merged with iManage, which, if readers don't know, I'm sure they do, listeners don't know, is the UK's probably first and most famous legal AI company. I went in to see them, and they gave me a demo, and I wrote, it wasn't a blog post then, it was a LinkedIn post, which was, the first line was, I have seen the future in a warehouse in Shoreditch. And that post, I've been posting on LinkedIn for donkey's years, and that post just went bananas. It melted my computer. It got so many hits, and I just thought, wow, there's legs to this. People really do care about the subjects. I should keep going. So I transferred over from blogging on LinkedIn to doing my own blog, and then it just took off. The rest is history.
Well, I love the title. I have seen the future in a warehouse in Shoreditch. For those that aren't from the UK, Shoreditch is the white heat of our startup community. So I can imagine that did get quite a lot of excitement. But I was looking through and thank you for joining us, Richard. By the way, I failed to do the introduction. I was so excited about launching into this conversation. But thank you very much for joining us. One of the many great articles on the blog I noticed when I was just researching our chat was one headed "Legal AI and the Industrialization of Cognition," which is again another great title, a great hook. But there's some really interesting stuff within that particular article. That just for those that haven't read the article, and I recommend whoever is listening to this to go to it afterwards. Just give us a little bit of a background to that article and some of the conclusions that you came to with it.
Okay. In short, law is a process. The end result is a good, a legal product, a legal service. It's a production line, and it has been a production line ever since law started to form into a profession 2,500 years ago. But that profession has been pretty much artisanal. It's been a very manual profession. The only way that human lawyers could understand the document was to read it with their own eyes, use their own minds. It was very, very hard to sort of crystallize knowledge other than by writing it down. And then once you'd written it down, there was very, very little else you could do with it except to go and read it again. And this was fine when the total amount of legal knowledge that you needed to work with the client was relatively small. 2,500 years ago, the average Roman company probably didn't have that many contracts. Didn't need to worry too much about its data core. Scroll forward to 2017, the contract volume of a large global company is just colossal. The quantity of legal needs, the diversity of needs. You've got litigation going on, you've got mergers, you've got regulatory issues, you've got compliance issues, you've got employment, IP, patents. The list goes on. It's vast, global, multi-level, and it's producing so much data, legal data, mostly in contract form. So how on earth do you read all of this? Because we've hit this, what you might call a cognitive barrier. How does an individual lawyer, whether in-house or in a law firm, understand what is going on in all those documents? And until very, very recently, literally just the last couple of years, there was only one way to find out. And that was you had to read it. And of course, no individual would read all of it. So they would bring in junior lawyers, paralegals, and so forth. And they would carry on and this is the amazing thing, in exactly the same way that lawyers 2,500 years did this. And that nothing had changed. I mean, there's very, very few professions, I can't think of many at all, where the basic core practice has not changed in 2,500 years. It's extraordinary. However, what we're now seeing is the Industrial Revolution edging into the legal world finally. But it had a very, very, very long run-up because what was needed from machinery, from technology, was so complicated that it couldn't really get a purchase. It's like trying to climb up a mountain that's covered in grease. You just couldn't get up it because there was nothing really for technology to do that was that significant. I mean, you've got document management systems, and email systems, virtual data rooms, and so forth. But fundamentally, all that is doing is holding data, storing data, shuffling data around, moving it from one place to another. You're not really performing work in the true sense on that data. Not in the same way that machines do in the industrial sector or in the medical sector or in accounting, banking, all these other areas where you can use machines much, much more easily. Then finally, natural language processing comes along and reaches a degree of sophistication where you can actually use it to read the documents once it has been trained. And this is what I call the industrialization of cognition, because we've breached a very, very important barrier. And I think a lot of people who talk about AI or are aware of AI still don't actually realize how significant it is. There's almost this sense of, okay, well, yeah, we've seen Kira, Raven, we've seen Premonition, we've seen all these different AI systems, great, we get it. And you're like, well, no, you don't get it. The fundamental basis under which the law is operated, i.e. the only way to extract meaning from something is to read it with your own eyes, has changed.
Well, listen, that's really interesting, because at the bottom of that article, or somewhere in the article, you've kind of alluded to it there, that you mentioned the first wave of AI being, the documentation and of documents. Find the right phrase for it, but
Doc review.
Doc review. Thank you very much for rescuing me there, Richard. Because what I would say as devil's advocate, the lawyers have sat around watching all this going on in the background, but actually their model hasn't really changed. And then they're kind of, a lot of them kind of saying, well, fine, but we're carrying on as we are. My sense from that article and from what you just said, but also from things like the Legal Geek event the other week, which we'll maybe come to, is that we have suddenly reached a tipping point, and that the second wave of AI, the really interesting in terms of value to the consumer and access to law, is about to happen, and the really significant changes are about to arrive. And essentially, I think that article and what you've just said was driving in that direction.
Kind of. Well, yes and no. Fundamentally, if you think about the production of a legal good, right? Let's say a contract. It's a production line. In the same way that making a car is a production line. Now, along that production line, some parts of it are purely manual, some parts of it are semi-automated, so a human is using a machine, like a drill, and then other parts are completely automated. So, like, for example, today, the spray painting of cars is completely automated. No, humans don't get involved because the paint is toxic, etc., etc. The car goes into a special shed, the robotic arms come down, and the whole thing is sprayed automatically down to a computer program. So you've got three different levels of labour. You've got pure human labour, you've got assisted, sort of mechanically assisted, technologically assisted labour, and then you've got purely automatic. And I don't see the entire legal production line becoming automated, excepting for very, very simple legal goods. But we will get, finally, some really powerful, you might say, sort of legal AI engines getting mixed into that production line, which will take over some of the tasks once they've been trained almost completely. But I don't see the entire production line disappearing up the back end of an AI.
It's a nice image, Richard, but thank you for that. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm completely with you. And of course, lawyers, I think, have been complacent about the change not impacting on what they do. Their model is relatively sticking to the same principle that it's been for 1,000 or 2,000 years, as you say, putting on the taximeter. But I just get a sense with, and maybe there's an education piece actually here. I'm sure there is an education piece that this AI is about invigorating, not destroying what they're doing. And robots, I read a quote somewhere that robots will make lawyers better. I'm not sure the lawyers will see it that way, but that's the tipping point I mean. Do you think, for example, firms may begin to release more data that enables AI to go deeper?
Well, first of all, if you don't mind, I have to say we should stop using the term robots related to law, because it's slightly misleading. People tend to anthropomorphize what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, as we all know, it's just a few thousand lines of code, very intelligent code, very clever code, but that's all it is. It's just code. There's nothing robotic really about it. There is actually a process called robotic process automation, which is used in they use it for sort of document review in sort of LPOs and places like that, and it's all about trying to speed the process of reviewing documents. But that's really a side issue. In terms of the use of data, it's not so much about releasing data, it's more about gaining visibility of data and realizing what you can do with it. I mean, even now, many law firms and many companies, their contracts are still in paper form. There's not a lot you can do with a paper contract because you've got to OCR it, you've got to digitize it, and you've got to analyze it. And to some degree, you need to understand what it is that you're trying to look for. And I think that's probably one of the greatest challenges with AI. And it goes back to the earlier point about, people have seen some of these review-based systems, NLP systems, and they kind of go, oh, yeah, okay, I get that. But then what they don't really get is just how powerful that tool is. It's like giving someone a map, and they kind of go, okay, that's pretty cool. They light a candle. They go, whoa, I lit a candle. Fantastic. And you're like, yeah, but you could do a lot of things with that fire. You're just scratching the surface with what you can do with this technology that we've just given you. Think more broadly about it. Every single contract that a large company has can now be read, machine read, using NLP, and you can search for different aspects. So, for example, to use an example of Premonition, Premonition has gone into, for example, the US, various stores of US court data, and has pulled out thousands and thousands of court documents, and using NLP has been able to read them and to find meaning in those, which previously it wasn't hidden. Obviously, it wasn't like a secret, but you just couldn't work at scale. And even if you got a bunch of lawyers to read 1,000 documents, there'd be another pile of 1,000 documents and another pile of 1,000 documents, and then putting that all together and joining the dots. That's an immensely difficult thing for humans to do. I mean, that's one of the problems with humans, is that we have incredibly sophisticated brains. We can do massive amounts of parallel processing. I could say a word to you, and within a couple of seconds, you've moved through literally 20 or 30 different ideas, images, sounds, recollections, following thoughts, all based on that. The human brain is tremendous. But what we can't do is work at massive scale, at massive volume, all at the same time. If I say one word to you and then, I wait for your reaction, you can handle that. If I start firing a word at you every millisecond, your brain quickly goes, what the, and shuts down.
Yes. Yes. No, I have that with my child actually. I very quick rapid fire at me, and I'm lost. I'm lost immediately. No, absolutely. I mean, but you do you sense, going back really all the way to an original question in this conversation, Richard, that there's an element of a tipping point going on here? I mean, I refer you to 2 or 3 recent events, and be interested to get your feedback on it. I know through following your Twitter feed that you went to the Legal Geek event, which again, to people not in the UK, was a tremendous. It's kind of described as the Woodstock of legal tech, which is it gives you a nice image. Then we had this case crunch example, which Premonition were judges of. So just to disclose our role in it, but a really interesting process here of machine against lawyer. But actually, Richard, just give us did you attend that last week?
But I know the team well. I followed them right from the beginning when they were still at Cambridge. So they've been through several iterations, but the current product has a strong focus on being able to help corporates to some degree, and also law firms, with predicting the outcome of potential cases, which is pretty useful. In fact, I was literally just listening to someone from IBM giving a talk about something quite similar, where they're talking about corporates analysing past litigation data to figure out if certain claims are likely to progress to court.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why they're looking at this is because it costs 3 times more to settle a claim against you once it's entered the courtroom than it does if you settle it before it enters the courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
So for a large corporate that's constantly being hit by claims, if they can get some type of, forewarning of this, some predictability, then that would be extremely helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was going to say Lawbot, but they're now called CaseCrunch, is doing is not dissimilar. And other companies are also moving in this direction as well. And for example, Kennedy themselves, and perhaps this is why there's a connection, which is the law firm where they invest the results, is also looking at how it can look at past insurance claims against their insurance clients and help to predict some of the outcomes, maybe the cost of certain claims, the predictability of those claims winning, other aspects which will actually help their clients to respond better.
Mm-hmm. No, it's fascinating, and just for those listening, if you're not quite sure of the references we're making here, I'm going to put a number of URLs at the end of the article. The one we've just talked about there is an event that took place on Friday, hosted by CaseCrunch, which was Man versus Machine Challenge to predict the outcome of a series of legal cases. It was fascinating. And Richard, I think, were you referring to the MIT Legal Forum there with the
Yes.
the post? Yeah. So again, amazing stuff. So three things there. I'll include links on the article that will follow this podcast for people who are interested in following up on the Legal Geek event as well. So Richard, listen, really fascinating. We could talk for a long time on this, but I'm going to actually ask you to grab that old crystal ball that you have in Tromans Consulting, and just give us a sense. Where do you think? Because there is a risk of a lot of hype and hyperbole in legal tech, or in the tech world in general. What do you think is going to really happen in the next 5 to 10 years that's going to change the landscape dramatically? But particularly, I'm interested particularly from the consumer's perspective as well as from the lawyer's perspective.
Yeah, okay. Well, from the consumers is harder, and I'll come to that last.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I think we'll see, perhaps counterintuitively, is we're going to see a massive increase in the number of paralegals.
Right.
But we will see, I believe, in the next 5 years, at least, well, hopefully in the next 5 years, we will see what I would call peak paralegal. And I think this is actually going to be a really, really significant point in the history of the legal market, because the division of labour and pricing pressure has created this whole industry of paralegals, which never even existed. If you go back sort of pre-World War II, the number of paralegals were tiny. As technology has increased, the quantity of data has increased, and the need for more and more paralegals, it's a bit like with typing pools. If you went back to, say, 1900, most businesses would have had a small typing pool to handle letters, contracts, invoices, and so forth. By the time you got to the 50s and 60s, those typing pools were gigantic. Imagine a big office block in Manhattan. Several of those floors would have just been typists. Receiving information, typing it up, carbon copy, maybe in the early days, using some of those early photocopy machines, like when it appeared on Mad Men. I don't know if you remember that episode when they brought in the photocopy.
I do, yes. took over a whole room.
Exactly, that's what it was like.
Yeah.
70s, again, the total number of typists was increasing. Getting into the early 80s, it's still increasing. People just going like, how can we have any more typists in the building? This is going crazy. And then suddenly, you get towards the mid-80s, and then suddenly, snap, the elasticity of that market comes back because of technology. Personal computing, or computers that are cheap enough for large businesses to put on their desks, start to enter the workforce en masse. And the ability to control information and move information around just starts to change. And the total number of typists starts to decrease incredibly rapidly. And that is following through even now. So for example, today, the number of legal secretaries inside a law firm is hugely smaller. In the old days, it used to be one secretary per lawyer. Even associates, if they were lucky, a couple of associates might have their own secretary. Now you might have a team of 5 or 6 people or more, just with one secretary, because the ability, the productivity, because of new technology, has massively changed the balance, the division of labour. And I believe we'll see this happen with paralegals because because of the growing flow of data in the commercial world, law firms will keep responding by adding more and more paralegals. Ironically, at the same time as they're investing more and more into AI systems and other types of automation, but eventually we'll hit a peak. We'll hit peak paralegal, and the market for paralegals will completely collapse. And a lot of businesses who are in that will end up bankrupt, I would suggest.
All right, I'm going to ditch my paralegal course, Richard. But thank you for that.
Yeah, that's my number one prediction. Prediction 2 has got to be, and I think this is a no-brainer really, is that the uses and the use cases for AI will just spread. As discussed, the main area at the moment is document review, whether this is transactionally driven, like M&A due diligence, or it's related to litigation research, such as Premonition does. At the moment, it's primarily document review. That's where the most interest is. That's where the most companies are, and that's where the most use cases are. And also, of course, you've got the whole e-discovery area, but let's not talk about that today. We'll be here all day. But there are at least 8 different branches of legal AI that I counted, and perhaps even 10, depending on how you count it. And I think what will happen is it will spread, just in the same way that automation and industrialization in the 18th century focused on steam trains and mines, and to some degree threshing machines and stuff like that in the farms. It will start to develop, and technology will link with other technology. We're already starting to see it. For example, Kira Systems has done some great work with Logic, which is an expert system company, and they are doing some really interesting collaborations. And I think we'll see much more of that, and we're seeing natural language generation in patent filing. We're seeing behavior analysis. We're seeing much more sophisticated prediction software. We're seeing fee analysis systems. So all kinds of stuff is going to come out. I think that's my second prediction, and it will work its way through wherever it can find a good, solid use case. And the third prediction, I think, and we haven't talked about this at all, is smart contracts and blockchain. Because fundamentally, the use of the smart contract just makes so much sense. Having a self-executing element in a contract is just so efficient and so productive, and it just removes so much friction from the process of law. Because, a lot of the focus at the moment is in the production of a legal good, not how that legal good then performs. So in this case, a contract. I think we have to see that a self-executing contract, which doesn't need a lawyer to, you might say, activate it or respond to it, or to validate it. Once it's sent out into the world, once it's placed on a blockchain, off it can go. And we're already seeing that. For example, AXA, the insurance giant, has started issuing flight delay insurance that is wrapped around and programmed into a smart contract. And you actually go onto their website, buy that. Literally, members of the public can buy a contract right now.
Wow, amazing.
So I think in 5 years' time, that is going to be much, much more embedded into business, particularly insurance. I think insurance will definitely be a really, really early mover on that. And fundamentally, there's going to be more. I don't think it's going to happen quickly, but eventually, longer term, we will see a convergence. This is something IBM talked about, and also Seal, Kevin Gidney at Seal, has also talked about this in the past, about the convergence of AI and smart contract technology.
Richard, truly fascinating. I could listen to you for ages. Someone with so much insight about it all. But I'm going to have to go and put the kettle on and make myself a cup of tea as we're getting to the end of our recording here. And listen, I'll come back to you if this fledgling podcast is still going in 2022. I'm going to come back to you about those 3 predictions and see where we are. But Richard, I really appreciate your time. It's very kind of you to join us.
My pleasure.
And we'll be following with interest the Artificial Lawyer blog from here on. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Cheers, Richard.